Eliza, rejected for her appearance, is sent to the Navajo tribe as punishment. But Thomas, a warrior, sees her pain and helps her heal as she transforms into a symbol of strength. Eliza must decide her fate when the governor's men come to take her back. Hey there, thanks for being here. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you think of the story. Let's keep going. The wagon lurched violently over the rocky desert path, and each jolt seemed to echo the contempt that Eliza carried in her chest. Her trembling hands gripped the worn wooden side as she watched Arizona's desolate landscape stretch endlessly before her. We're here, the driver muttered. Refusing to meet her eyes, Eliza climbed down from the wagon with difficulty, her feet touching the red, scorching earth. In the distance, the silhouettes of Navajo tents outlined themselves against the golden horizon of late afternoon. The wind carried the scent of sage and something she couldn't identify. Perhaps it was the aroma of freedom itself, or of damnation. Governor Samuel Montaluna had spoken few words before sending her here. You no longer serve our family. Let the natives do with you what they will. Now, watching the figures emerging from the tents to see her, Eliza felt the familiar weight of rejection. The brown faces studied her with a mixture of curiosity and displeasure. A child pointed in her direction and was quickly scolded by an older woman. Eliza lowered her gaze to her own hands. Fat, unwanted, abandoned. That's how the world saw her. That's how she had learned to see herself. The wagon departed in a cloud of dust, taking with it the last link to her previous life. The first night was the longest of Eliza's life. She had been given a small, weathered tent at the edge of the village, far enough to be forgotten, close enough to be watched. The canvas walls felt like a prison, and the silence outside was broken only by distant conversations in a language she didn't understand. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but no one had offered her food. She curled up on the rough blanket they'd thrown at her feet, trying to make herself as small as possible. Through a gap in the tent flap, she could see the warm glow of the central fire where families gathered for their evening meal. They think I'm cursed, she whispered to herself, remembering the way the elder had shaken his head when she arrived. From the shadows beyond the firelight, someone was watching her. Thomas Yezi stood motionless, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. He had seen the wagon arrive, had witnessed the cruel dismissal of a daughter by powerful men who spoke of honor, but knew nothing of it. The woman Eliza reminded him of something he tried to forget. The way she held her shoulders as if preparing for the next blow. The careful distance she kept from others, expecting rejection before it came. He knew the posture well. He'd worn it himself since his fall from grace 3 months ago. He had defied the tribal council by saving a wounded white settler during a border skirmish. The man had been dying, calling for his mother in delirium. Thomas couldn't walk away. But mercy, he'd learned, was sometimes seen as weakness. Now he was no longer welcome among the hunters. The young warriors who once sought his counsel avoided his gaze. Children were told not to play near his tent. Like the woman, he had become invisible. As the fire died down and the village settled into sleep, Thomas made a decision that would change both their lives. He gathered some dried corn, wild berries, and a piece of cooked rabbit from his modest supplies. Moving silently through the darkness, he approached Eliza's tent. Her breathing was shallow, fitful. She wasn't sleeping, just lying still, waiting for morning to bring more humiliation. Thomas placed the small bundle of food near her tent entrance and retreated into the shadows. He didn't expect gratitude. He didn't expect acknowledgement. He simply knew what it felt like to be hungry and alone. Inside the tent, Eliza heard the soft footsteps. Her body tensed, prepared for mockery or worse. But the footsteps retreated. Minutes passed. Curiosity finally overcame fear, and she peered outside. The food sat there like a small miracle in the moonlight. For the first time since arriving, tears came not of despair, but of something she'd almost forgotten existed. Kindness died in the distance. Thomas watched her discover his offering. He saw her shoulders shake as she wept, saw her careful fingers as she brought the food inside. Tomorrow, he would leave more, and perhaps, slowly, she would understand that not everyone saw her as a burden. The desert night was cold, but something warm had been planted in the darkness between two broken souls. Days passed in a rhythm of quiet offerings. Each morning, Eliza would find food waiting outside her tent, sometimes roasted roots, other times strips of dried meat or fresh fish from the nearby stream. She never saw who left them, but she began to suspect it was the tall, silent man she glimpsed at the village's periphery, Thomas Yezi. She had learned his name by listening to whispered conversations, understanding fragments through gestures and context. The women spoke of him with a mixture of respect and disappointment, their voices carrying the weight of a story she didn't yet know. On the fifth day, she decided to wait, hidden behind her tent flap in the pre-dawn darkness. Eliza watched the shadows. Her heart hammered as a figure approached, tall, moving with the careful grace of someone accustomed to silence. Thomas placed a small clay bowl near her entrance, but this time, he didn't immediately retreat. He knelt in the dirt, his weathered face turned toward her tent. "I know you're watching," he said softly in English, his accent thick but clear. Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to speak her language. "You don't have to hide," Thomas continued, his voice carrying no judgment. "Hunger is nothing to be ashamed of." Slowly, carefully, Eliza pushed aside the tent flap. The morning air was cool against her face as she met his dark eyes for the first time. There was no pity there, no disgust at her appearance, only a quiet understanding that made her throat tighten. "Why?" she whispered. Thomas studied her face, seeing past the exhaustion and fear to something else, a strength that hadn't been broken, only buried, because no one deserves to starve alone. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "My grandmother used to say that food shared in darkness feeds more than the body." "What does it feed?" Eliza asked, surprising herself by speaking. Hope, the word, hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. "Eat," Thomas said gently, gesturing toward the bowl. "Then, if you want, walk with me to the stream. The morning light is good for washing away yesterday's sorrows." After he left, Eliza stared at the bowl of stewed corn and wild onions. It smelled of smoke and earth and something indefinably comforting. As she ate, she realized it was the first food that had tasted like care rather than mere sustenance. An hour later, she found herself following Thomas's silent figure toward the sound of running water. Her legs felt weak from days of minimal movement, but each step seemed to carry her further from the frightened woman who had arrived in the wagon. At the stream, Thomas knelt at the water's edge and cupped his hands, drinking deeply. Eliza hesitated, then knelt beside him. The water was shockingly cold and clear, tasting of minerals and sky. "The village thinks you bring bad luck," Thomas said without looking at her. Eliza flinched, but he continued, "They think the same of me." She turned to study his profile, strong nose, silver threading through his black hair, lines carved by weather and worry. "Why I help someone they believed I shouldn't help." He finally met her gaze. Sometimes doing right feels wrong too. Those who've forgotten what right looks like, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the water's gentle music. For the first time since her father's cruel dismissal, Eliza felt something other than despair. It was fragile and small, but it was there, a tiny flame of possibility. "What's your name?" Thomas asked. "Eliza." She tasted the sound of it in her own voice, as if rediscovering something she'd lost. "Eliza," he repeated, and somehow it sounded different when he said it, not like a burden or an embarrassment, but like a name that belonged to someone worthy of speaking to. As they walked back to the village, Eliza noticed that her steps felt steadier, her breathing easier. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and amber, and for the first time, she found it beautiful rather than hostile. Behind them, several villagers had gathered to watch their return. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to disapproval, but Eliza found she cared less about their judgment. Thomas walked beside her with quiet dignity, and somehow that made her feel less alone in the world. The morning ritual continued for 2 weeks. Thomas would bring food. Eliza would emerge from her tent, and they would walk to the stream together. With each passing day, she felt herself growing stronger, not just from the nourishment, but from having someone who saw her as a person worth saving. It was during one of these walks that Thomas finally spoke of his past. "I was a hunter," he said, settling on a flat rock beside the water, "one of the best. The young men came to me to learn how to read tracks, how to move without sound." Eliza noticed the past tense, the weight it carried. "What happened?" Thomas picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his weathered hands. 3 months ago, there was a skirmish near the border. Settlers and our warriors had words over water rights. A man was shot, a white man. Bleeding out in the desert, he threw the stone into the stream. Watching the ripples expand outward, he was calling for his mother, just like my own son did. When he passed from fever to winters ago, the confession hung between them like a prayer. Eliza felt her heart constrict with understanding. "I couldn't leave him to die alone," Thomas continued. "So I carried him to safety, gave him water, tended his wound until help came." "That was kind," Eliza said softly. "The tribal council called it betrayal." His voice carried no bitterness, only tired acceptance. "They said I chose a stranger over my people, that I dishonored our warriors who were wounded in the same fight." Eliza watched his profile, seeing the pain he carried with such dignity. "Do you regret it?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, listening to the stream's gentle murmur. "I regret that kindness is sometimes seen as weakness. But no, I don't regret saving a man who was dying, even though it cost you everything." He turned to look at her then, his dark eyes holding depth she was only beginning to understand. "It cost me my position, my status, but it didn't cost me everything." His gaze held hers. "It brought me to this moment, sitting beside someone who understands what it means to be cast aside for things beyond our control." Heat rose in Eliza's cheeks, not from shame, but from something warmer. No one had ever spoken of her presence as a gift before. "Tell me about your father," Thomas said gently. The request should have felt intrusive, but coming from him, it felt like an invitation to unburden herself. "Governor Samuel Montaluna," she began, tasting the bitterness of the name. "A man who values appearance above all else." She gathered her courage, finding strength in Thomas's patient silence. "I was born different, larger than other girls, quieter than he wanted. My mother died when I was small, so there was no one to soften his disappointment." Thomas nodded, understanding the shape of the particular pain. "He tried to marry me off twice." Both men took one look and found excuses to withdraw their offers. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The last one said I would embarrass him in public, that his reputation couldn't survive being associated with someone like me. "And so your father sent you here, as punishment, to teach me humility," he said, "to make me grateful for whatever scraps of kindness I might eventually receive." She looked down at her hands. "He told me the Navajo people owed him favors, that they would take me as payment." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You are not payment for anything. You are not a debt to be settled." The fierce certainty in his voice made her look up in surprise. "You are Eliza," he said simply, "a woman who deserves respect, kindness, and the chance to choose her own path." Tears blurred her vision, but for once they weren't tears of despair. "I've never had anyone speak of me that way." Then they were fools who couldn't see what was right in front of them. They walked back to the village in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them. Eliza felt the weight of secrets shared, of understanding given and received. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was walking alone. That evening, as she prepared for sleep, she found herself thinking not about her father's cruelty or the village's rejection, but about Thomas's words. Asterisk, you deserve the chance to choose your own path. Asterisk, perhaps, she thought as sleep finally came. It was time to start choosing. 3 weeks after her arrival, Eliza made her first independent decision. Instead of waiting in her tent for Thomas's morning visit, she rose before dawn and walked to the stream alone. The desert air was crisp, filled with the scent of sage and the distant promise of sunrise. Her legs, stronger now from regular walks and proper food, carried her confidently along the familiar path. When she reached the water's edge, she knelt and splashed the cold stream over her face. Feeling truly awake for the first time in years, "You're early today." She turned to find Thomas approaching, carrying his usual offering of food. But instead of the surprise she expected, his face held approval. "I wanted to see the sunrise from here," she said, and realized it was true. The simple act of choosing where to be felt revolutionary. They sat together as the sky transformed from deep purple to gold, painting the desert landscape in warm hues. Thomas handed her a piece of flatbread wrapped around roasted rabbit, and they ate in comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," Eliza said finally, "about what you said yesterday, about choosing my own path." Thomas nodded, waiting. "I don't know how to do that. I've spent my whole life being told what I am, what I can't be, where I don't belong." She paused, gathering courage. "But I want to learn." "What do you want to learn first?" The question was so direct, so free of judgment, that it took her breath away. "Everything," she whispered, then louder. "Everything." Thomas smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his weathered features, revealing traces of the respected hunter he'd once been. "Then we start with what you need to survive here," he said. "Can you identify which plants are safe to eat?" Eliza shook her head. "Do you know how to track water sources? How to read weather signs? How to move quietly?" Each note should have felt like failure. But instead, Eliza felt excitement building. These weren't criticisms, they were possibilities. "Then that's where we begin," Thomas said. "But first, you need to understand something about this village." He gestured toward the distant tents. "Most of them aren't cruel people. They're afraid. Your father told them you were payment for debts, but they know that's not how honor works. Taking you and made them complicit in his cruelty, and that sits poorly with many. Then why haven't they helped me? Because they don't know how to fix what they've participated in." Thomas's voice was gentle, but honest. "But if you show them who you really are, not the burden your father claimed you to be, but the woman you're becoming, some of them will surprise you," as if summoned by his words. Footsteps approached along the path. Ayana, one of the younger women from the village, appeared carrying a water basket. She stopped when she saw them, uncertainty flickering across her face. Thomas stood slowly. "Good morning, Ayana." "Good morning, Thomas." Her eyes moved to Eliza, who remained seated by the stream. For a long moment, the three of them formed a triangle of tension. Then Eliza made her second independent decision of the day. She stood and walked to the stream's edge, kneeling to cup the cold water in her hands. "The water is good here," she said simply to Ayana. "Cold and clean." It wasn't much, just an observation about water. But it was the first words Eliza had spoken directly to any villager besides Thomas. Ayana blinked in surprise, then slowly approached the stream. She knelt beside Eliza, filling her basket. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "It runs from the high springs, very pure." They knelt together for a moment, two women sharing the simple task of gathering water. When Ayana rose to leave, she paused. "I have extra cornmeal," she said to Eliza, "from yesterday's grinding. Would you like some?" Eliza's throat tightened with gratitude. "Yes, thank you." After Ayana left, Thomas looked at Eliza with something that might have been pride. "And so it begins," he said softly. The cornmeal from Ayana sat in a small clay pot inside Eliza's tent, her first gift from the village. She touched it each morning before leaving to meet Thomas, a tangible reminder that kindness could spread. Like ripples in still water. Thomas had become her patient teacher. Each day brought new lessons. How to identify edible cactus pads. How to read the direction of wind by watching grass bend. How to move across rocky ground without leaving obvious tracks. Your feet are too heavy, he said on her fourth day of tracking practice. You're fighting the earth instead of working with it. Eliza paused, frustrated. Her body felt clumsy and loud compared to his fluid movements. I'm too big for this. Too awkward. Thomas stopped and faced her. Size has nothing to do with grace. Watch. He pointed to a large boulder balanced impossibly on a smaller rock formation. That stone weighs more than 10 men, yet it sits perfectly balanced. Why? Because it's positioned correctly. Because it works with gravity instead of fighting it, he demonstrated, showing her how to shift her weight, how to feel for stable ground before committing to each step. Your body knows how to move efficiently. You just need to listen to it instead of apologizing for it. The breakthrough came suddenly. One moment Eliza was stumbling over loose stones, and the next she was flowing around them, her feet finding purchase on solid ground while barely disturbing the sand between. The sensation was intoxicating. Her body finally felt like an ally rather than an enemy. There, Thomas said quietly, now you're moving like yourself. That afternoon, he led her to a higher vantage point overlooking the village. From here, she could see the entire community, children playing between the tents, women working leather and weaving baskets, men tending horses and repairing tools. What do you see? Thomas asked. People living their lives. Look closer. Eliza studied the scene more carefully. Gradually, she began to notice things. How certain families shared cooking fires. How the older children helped tend the younger ones. How work was divided but never hoarded. They take care of each other. She realized, yes, even when they're afraid, even when they make mistakes, they remember they're part of something larger. He looked at her meaningfully. You could be part of that too, if you choose. How? I don't know their customs, their language, you know. Kindness, you know gratitude. You know how to work hard and treat others with respect. Thomas's voice was firm. Those things translate into any language as if to prove his point. Young voices called from below. 2 children had gotten there, ball stuck in a thorny bush, and were crying in frustration. Without thinking, Eliza started down the slope. Careful, Thomas called, but he didn't follow. This was her choice to make. Eliza approached the children slowly, speaking softly. It's all right. Let me help. The boy, perhaps 6 years old, looked up at her with wide, fearful eyes. But the girl, slightly older, studied Eliza's face and seemed to find something trustworthy there. And there, the girl said in English, pointing to the bush. Eliza examined the thorny branches, then carefully parted them at their weakest point. She reached in slowly, ignoring the scratches on her forearms, and retrieved the woven grass ball. Here, she said, offering it to the children. The boy snatched it and ran toward the village. But the girl lingered, looking up at Eliza with curious eyes. Thank you, she said solemnly, then added something in Navajo that Eliza didn't understand but felt in her heart. When Eliza returned to Thomas, she found him smiling. What did she say? She said you have kind hands, he replied. In our culture, that's one of the highest compliments a child can give. Eliza looked down at her scratched, ordinary hands, the same hands her father had called clumsy, that suitors had found unworthy. For the first time, she saw them as Thomas and the child did, capable of gentleness, worthy of praise. Tomorrow, Thomas said as they prepared to return to the village, I'll teach you to identify medicinal plants. The healer, Maria, has been watching you. I think she might welcome an extra pair of kind hands. Maria Begay was ancient by any measure, her face a map of deep lines carved by decades of desert sun, and countless nights spent tending the sick. When Thomas brought Eliza to her tent, the old healer studied the younger woman with eyes sharp as obsidian. So, Maria said in accented English, you're the governor's daughter. I was, Eliza replied carefully. I'm not sure what I am now. Maria made a sound that might have been approval. Good answer. Sit. The healer's tent was larger than most, filled with bundles of dried plants hanging from the ceiling and clay pots containing mysterious powders and liquids. The air smelled of sage, cedar, and something medicinal that made Eliza think of her childhood nursemaid's remedies. Thomas tells me you have gentle hands, Maria said, settling cross-legged on a woven mat. Show me. She handed Eliza a bundle of fresh willow bark and a sharp stone. Strip the outer layer. Careful, too much pressure and you'll waste the inner bark where the medicine lives. Eliza took the tools, her hands trembling slightly under the older woman's scrutiny. But as she began to work, muscle memory from years of needlework guided her fingers. She peeled away thin strips of bark, revealing the pale, fibrous layer. Beneath that, Maria watched silently, occasionally nodding. When Eliza finished, the healer examined her work with careful attention. Not bad for a first try, she pronounced. The pieces are even, no waste. Your hands denote gentleness. Over the next hour, Maria taught Eliza to identify different healing plants: purple coneflower for infections, yarrow to stop bleeding, desert sage for cleansing wounds. Each plant had its own story, its own personality, its own gifts to offer. This one, Maria said, holding up a sprig of fur-clocked flowers, helps with swelling. But you must ask the plant's permission before taking it. Everything that heals has spirit. Respect that spirit, and it will work better for you. The concept felt foreign yet somehow familiar. Eliza's father's world operated on taking power. Land, people, here was a different way of thinking, based on relationship and reciprocity. How do you ask permission? Eliza wondered. With your heart, not your words, Maria replied. The plant will tell you if it's ready to help. That afternoon, a young woman named Sarah arrived carrying her feverish infant. The baby's cries filled the tent as Maria examined him with gentle, experienced hands. Summer fever, the healer diagnosed. Not dangerous, but uncomfortable. Eliza, bring me the willow bark you prepared. As Maria worked, grinding the bark into powder and mixing it with warm water, she explained each step to Eliza. The bitter taste helps, but so does the mother's calm. Fear passes from parent to child like fire through dry grass. Eliza found herself speaking softly to Sarah, sharing the story of her own childhood fevers and how her nursemaid used to sing, while applying cool cloths to her forehead. As Sarah relaxed, so did the baby, his cries subsiding to tired whimpers. Here, Maria said to Eliza, handing her the medicinal tea. You give it to him. Sometimes healing works better when it comes from many hands. Eliza held the baby carefully, surprised by how naturally he settled in her arms. She offered him tiny sips of the bitter tea, singing an old lullaby her nursemaid had taught her. The infant's fever-bright eyes fixed on her face, and slowly, he began to calm. Good, Maria said quietly to Thomas, who had been watching from the tent entrance. She has the gift. Later, after Sarah had left with her sleeping child, Maria turned to Eliza. Come back tomorrow. There's much to teach you. Walking back to her tent that evening, Eliza felt something she'd never experienced before, the satisfaction of being truly useful. Her hands, which had been criticized as too large, too clumsy, had helped ease a child suffering. You're smiling, Thomas observed. Am I? Eliza touched her face, surprised. I suppose I am. It suits you, he said simply, and she felt warmth spread through her chest like medicine. 2 months had passed since Eliza's arrival, and the village had begun to change around her, or perhaps she had changed within it. Her morning walks with Thomas had expanded to include other villagers who gradually joined their conversations. Her afternoons with Maria had earned her a reputation as someone who could be trusted with both medicine and secrets. The transformation wasn't without resistance. Elder Joseph, fronting bare, still shook his head when he saw her, muttering about omens and disrupted balance. Some of the younger men avoided her gaze, uncertain how to reconcile her gentle demeanor with their preconceptions about the governor's cast-off daughter. But others had begun to see her differently. Eliza, Ayanna called one morning as she passed by with her water baskets. "Could you help me? My son has hurt his ankle." Without hesitation, Eliza followed her to where 8-year-old Daniel sat crying beside the stream, his foot swollen and tender. As Maria had taught her, Eliza knelt beside the boy and spoke to him in soft, reassuring tones while examining the injury. "Just a sprain," she determined, remembering Maria's lessons about reading swelling patterns. "But it hurts, doesn't it?" Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. Eliza gathered cold stones from the stream bed, wrapping them in soft cloth. "This will help with the swelling," she explained to Ayanna while gently applying the compress. "And tonight, make tea from willow bark, just a little, mixed with honey." As she worked, other villagers gathered to watch. There was something compelling about seeing the woman they had initially feared now comforting a child with such natural skill. "Where did you learn this?" asked Robert Yazzie, Thomas's cousin, who had previously been one of her harshest critics. "From Maria," Eliza replied simply, "and from watching how Thomas moves through the world gently, with purpose." The comment sparked murmurs of approval. Thomas was respected, even in his exile, for his wisdom and character. To have earned his attention and teaching spoke well of her that evening. As Eliza prepared to return to her tent, she found a small gathering waiting for her. Several women sat in a loose circle, their hands busy with various tasks: mending clothes, preparing food, weaving baskets. "Sit with us," invited Clara Blackhorse, an older woman whose initial suspicion had gradually mellowed into curiosity. Eliza hesitated, unsure of the protocol, but gentle gestures welcomed her into the circle. Someone handed her strips of leather that needed softening, showing her the proper technique for working the material. As they worked, the women talked about their children, their hopes for the coming harvest, small complaints about their husbands' habits. It was ordinary conversation, the kind Eliza had watched from the outside her entire life but never been invited to join. "Your hands are good for this work," observed Lucy Begay, Maria's niece, strong but careful. The compliment settled over Eliza like a warm blanket. These hands that had been criticized, dismissed, overlooked, here they were valued, appreciated for their capability rather than criticized for their size. "I like working with my hands," Eliza admitted. "It feels peaceful." "That's good," Clara nodded. "Peaceful hands make beautiful work." As the evening progressed, Eliza realized she wasn't just sitting with the women, she was becoming part of their circle. The invisible barrier that had separated her from community life was dissolving, replaced by the simple bonds of shared work and mutual respect. When Thomas appeared at the edge of the firelight, clearly checking on her welfare, several women waved him away with good-natured teasing. "She's fine, Thomas," Lucy called. "We're keeping her busy and learning she has more talents than we." "First thought," added Ayanna meaningfully, walking back to her tent later. Eliza reflected on the evening's unexpected gift. For the first time in her life, she had experienced what it meant to belong not as someone's daughter or political pawn, but simply as herself. The desert night no longer felt cold or lonely. It felt like home. The riders appeared on the horizon at midday, their horses kicking up clouds of red dust against the clear desert sky. Eliza was helping Maria organize medicinal supplies. When the lookout's cry echoed through the village, "Riders, coming, government men," the word struck Eliza like a physical blow. Her hands trembled as she set down the bundle of dried sage she'd been sorting. Through the tent opening, she could see the approaching figures, 3 men in official uniforms, their brass buttons glinting in the sunlight. "Easy," Maria said quietly, noting Eliza's sudden pallor. "Breathe, child." But Eliza couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating. After 3 months of building a new life, of finding purpose and acceptance, her father's world had come to reclaim her. Thomas appeared in the tent entrance, his face grim. They're asking for you. I won't go back, Eliza whispered the words, tumbling out in a rush of panic. I can't, please, I can't go back to being nothing. Thomas knelt beside her, his presence steady and calming. No one said you have to go anywhere. Chief William Bentley emerged from his tent to greet the government men, his weathered face carefully neutral. The lead rider, a thin man with a carefully waxed mustache, dismounted and approached with obvious authority. I am Captain Morrison, representing Governor Montaluna, he announced loud enough for the gathering villagers to hear. We've come for his daughter. She's not property to be collected, Chief Bentley replied evenly. Captain Morrison's expression hardened. She is a citizen under my governor's protection. He's concerned for her welfare. From inside Maria's tent, Eliza could hear every word. The familiar language of her father's power protection. Welfare. Concern all masks for control and possession. I have to face them, she realized, rising on unsteady legs. You don't, Thomas said firmly. You have choice now. You're not the same woman who arrived here. But Eliza was already moving toward the tent entrance. Yes, I am different, and that's exactly why I need to face them myself. She stepped into the afternoon sunlight, and several villagers moved subtly to flank her, not quite protection, but clear support. The gesture gave her strength she hadn't known she possessed. Captain Morrison's eyes swept over her dismissively, taking in her sun-darkened skin, her simple clothing, her confident posture. Miss Montaluna, your father is concerned about your situation here. My situation. Eliza's voice carried newfound steadiness. I'm learning useful skills, contributing to a community that values my work. I'm healthier and happier than I've ever been. Your father believes you may have been influenced by these people. The phrase hung in the air like an insult. Eliza felt anger kindle in her chest, not the helpless rage of her past, but something cleaner and more focused. Influenced to believe I have worth, to discover I am capable of more than being a political embarrassment. She stepped forward. Yes, Captain, I have been influenced by people who see value in kindness and healing, in working for the good of the community rather than personal gain. Captain Morrison's face flushed. Your father has been patient with your rebellion, but his patience has limits. Then perhaps it's time he learned that so does his daughter's willingness to be treated as a burden. The words surprised even Eliza with their strength behind her. She heard Thomas's quiet intake of breath, felt Maria's approving presence. Captain Morrison glanced at his men, clearly not having expected resistance. Miss Montaluna, you will return with us. These are your father's direct orders. Eliza looked at the captain, then at the villagers who had become her family, then back at the man representing everything she'd been taught to fear. No, she said, simply, I will not. The silence that followed Eliza's refusal stretched taut as a bowstring. Captain Morrison's face darkened, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon before Chief Bentley's subtle gesture reminded him where he stood. Miss Montaluna, Morrison said through gritted teeth, you're coming with us whether you consent or not. Your father has legal authority over you. Does he? Thomas stepped forward, his quiet voice carrying across the gathering. By what law? She's an adult woman who has harmed no one, committed no crime. She has chosen to remain here of her own free will. She is married and under her father's protection. She is under our protection now. Chief Bentley interrupted, his words carrying the weight of final decision. This woman has contributed to our community. She has earned the right to choose her own path. Captain Morrison looked around the circle of faces, weathered men, determined women, children peering out from behind their mothers' skirts. What? He saw there wasn't the compliance he'd expected, but unified resistance. This is interference with government business, he warned. This is respect for human dignity. Maria spoke up, her ancient voice carrying decades of authority. Something your governor seems to have forgotten. Eliza felt the support surrounding her like a warm cloak, but she knew the confrontation couldn't end this way. Her father wouldn't accept defeat, and these good people would pay the price for defying him. "Captain Morrison," she said, stepping forward again, "I'll make you a proposition." Thomas tensed beside her, but she continued, "Give me until sunset to consider your offer. In return, you and your men accept the village's hospitality for the evening, rest your horses, share our meal." Morrison's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What game are you playing?" "No game. Just a request for time to think." She met his gaze steadily. "Surely my father wouldn't begrudge me that much consideration." The captain exchanged glances with his men, clearly calculating. A few hours' delay seemed harmless enough, and the desert was no place to travel in darkness. Very well, he agreed reluctantly. "Until sunset. But then you come with us, willing or not." As the government men were shown to quarters, the villagers dispersed with meaningful looks. Eliza knew what they were thinking, the same thing she was. Sunset would bring a reckoning none of them were prepared for. Thomas walked beside her toward the stream, their usual sanctuary. "What are you planning?" he asked quietly. "I don't know yet." Eliza sat on their familiar rock, watching water flow over stones. "I only know I can't let them force me back into that life." "Then don't." She looked at him in surprise. "It's not that simple. My father has power, influence. He could make life difficult for everyone here. Let us worry about your father." Thomas sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You've spent 3 months learning to value yourself. Don't throw that away now because you're afraid of his anger." "I'm not afraid of his anger anymore," Eliza realized with surprise. "I'm afraid of losing this." She gestured toward the village, toward him. "I'm afraid of losing the person I've become." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "The person you've become isn't something that can be taken away. You carry her inside you now. But if I go back, who says you have to go back?" His dark eyes held hers. "There are other choices, Eliza, other paths." Before she could ask what he meant, voices called from the village. The afternoon was advancing, and with it, the weight of decision. "Whatever happens at sunset," Thomas said as they rose to return, "remember that you are not the same woman who arrived here in that wagon. You are Eliza Healer, friend, someone who belongs." His words wrapped around her heart like armor. Whatever came next, she would face it as the woman she had chosen to become. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, Eliza made her way to Maria's tent. The old healer sat grinding herbs, her movement steady and purposeful despite the tension that had settled over the village. "I need your counsel," Eliza said quietly. Maria looked up, her ancient eyes reading the turmoil in Eliza's face. "Sit, child. Tell me what troubles your heart." "I don't want to go back, but if I stay, my father will find ways to punish everyone here. He has that kind of power." Eliza's voice broke slightly. "How can I choose my own happiness when it might cost others their safety?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, continuing her grinding. The rhythmic sound was soothing, meditative. "When I was young," Maria finally said, "there was a drought, terrible, lasting years. The rivers dried up, the plants withered. Many people said we should abandon this place, find easier land. But you stayed, yes, because my grandmother told me something I've never forgotten." Maria paused in her work. She said that sometimes the hardest choice is also the most necessary one. That staying and fighting for what's right takes more courage than running away. "But the risk? There's always risk in doing what's right." Maria's voice was firm. "But there's greater risk in doing what's wrong just because it seems safer." As if summoned by their conversation, Thomas appeared at the tent entrance. "The captain is asking for you," he said to Eliza. "The sun is almost down." Eliza rose, her decision crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on still water. "Then, it's time." She walked toward the center of the village, where Captain Morrison waited with his men. The entire community had gathered, men, women, children, even the elders who rarely left their tents. Their faces showed a mixture of anxiety and determination, Chief Bentley stood beside the captain, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Montaluna," Morrison called impatiently, "your time is up. Are you ready to return to your father?" Eliza stepped into the circle of firelight, feeling the weight of every watching eye. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "Captain Morrison, please give my father this message. I am grateful for the life he gave me, but I choose the life I built for myself." Morrison's face flushed red. "That's not an option, Miss Montaluna. It's the only option I'm offering." Eliza straightened her shoulders. "I am a grown woman, capable of making my own decisions. I choose to remain here, with people who value me for who I am rather than what I represent. Your father will not accept this defiance. Then perhaps it's time my father learned that his daughter is no longer the frightened girl he cast aside." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I have found my purpose here, my place in the world. I will not abandon it to return to a life where I was treated as a burden and a disappointment." Thomas stepped forward to stand beside her, followed by Maria, then Chief Bentley, then one by one, the entire village. They formed a protective circle around her, their message clear without words. Captain Morrison looked around at the united community, his authority suddenly seeming very small against their collective resolve. "This isn't over," he warned. "Governor, Montaluna doesn't give up easily." "Neither," Eliza replied with quiet dignity. "This is daughter." As the government men mounted their horses and rode into the gathering darkness, Eliza felt something she'd never experienced before, the solid, unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks that followed Captain Morrison's departure brought an unexpected peace to the village. Eliza had braced herself for retaliation from her father, threats, economic pressure, perhaps even soldiers. But as days turned into weeks, no further emissaries appeared on the horizon. "Maybe he's finally accepted that you're not coming back," Thomas suggested one morning as they walked to the stream together. "Or maybe he's planning something worse," Eliza replied. But without the anxiety that would have consumed her months ago, she had learned that worrying about her father's next move was less important than focusing on the life she was building. That life had expanded beyond her wildest expectations. Maria had begun teaching her the deeper mysteries of healing, not just which plants to use, but how to read the body's signals, how to offer comfort in the face of suffering, how to know when medicine should yield to prayer and quiet presence. "You have the sight," Maria told her one afternoon as Eliza correctly diagnosed a child's stomach ailment. Before examining him, "It's a gift not everyone possesses." The women's circle had officially welcomed her as a full member, seeking her opinion on community matters and trusting her with their most private concerns. When Robert Yaz's wife Sarah went into difficult labor, the women called for Eliza to assist Maria with the delivery. The birth was long and complicated, stretching through the night and into the following dawn. Sarah's strength was failing when Eliza made a decision that surprised even herself. "Let me try something," she said to Maria, then knelt beside Sarah and began speaking to her in soft, encouraging tones, not about the pain or the difficulty, but about the life waiting to be born, about the joy that would come with morning. Something in her voice, in the absolute certainty of her belief, seemed to reach Sarah. The young mother found renewed strength, and as the sun painted the eastern sky golden, her daughter entered the world with a lusty cry. "What did you say to her?" Maria asked later as they cleaned their hands. "I told her what I wish someone had told me when I first arrived here," Eliza replied, "that sometimes the hardest struggles lead to the most beautiful outcomes." It was Thomas who suggested the ceremony, a naming. He explained as they sat by the stream one evening, "To mark your transformation, your acceptance into the tribe, if you want it." Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. "I would be honored." The ceremony took place under a full moon, with the entire village gathered in a circle around the central fire. Chief Bentley spoke in Navajo, his words translated by Thomas as he recounted Eliza's journey, her arrival as a frightened rejected woman, her gradual healing and growth, her contributions to the community's welfare. When the chief finished speaking, Maria stepped forward carrying a small clay bowl filled with paint made from red dessert clay. In our tradition, she explained, we mark new beginnings with symbols of the earth that has accepted you. She dipped her finger in the paint and drew a gentle line across Liz's forehead. You are no longer the governor's discarded daughter. You are Eliza walking in beauty, healer and daughter of this place. As the villagers spoke her new name in unison, Eliza felt something shift inside her chest, the last vestige of the frightened girl she'd been falling away, replaced by the confident woman she had become. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Thomas took her hand. How does it feel to be officially yourself? He asked. Eliza looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, people who had become her family, her community, her home. It feels like coming alive, she said softly, and knew it was the truest thing she'd ever spoken. Spring arrived in the desert with a burst of impossible color. Wildflowers painted the landscape in brilliant yellows, deep purples, and vibrant oranges, transforming the harsh terrain into something magical for Eliza. Now 6 months into her new life, the season felt like a reflection of her own transformation. She stood at the edge of the village, watching Thomas teach a group of young boys how to track deer. His movements were fluid, graceful, as he demonstrated how to read signs in the dust. The children hung on his every word, their earlier wariness of the disgraced hunter long forgotten. He is a good teacher, Maria observed, approaching with her morning tea. He saved my life, Eliza said simply. In every way a person can be saved. Maria studied her with knowing eyes. And how do you feel about the man who saved you? The question hung in the morning air like the scent of blooming sage. Eliza had been asking herself the same thing for weeks, watching the way Thomas's face lit up when he saw her, feeling her own heart quicken whenever he was near. I feel, she paused, searching for words. I feel like I understand now what people mean when they talk about their other half. Then perhaps it's time to tell him. That evening, Eliza found Thomas sitting alone by the stream, whittling a piece of wood into a small animal figure. The sight was so peaceful, so perfectly him, that she almost turned back. What if she was wrong about his feelings? What if her inexperience with love had led her to misread his kindness? It's an owl, he said without looking up, somehow sensing her presence. For little Daniel, he's been having nightmares. The owl will help. My grandmother believed they carried wisdom and protection through the darkness. He held up the small carving, studying it critically. I'm not sure I believe it anymore, but Daniel does. Sometimes that's enough. Eliza sat beside him on their familiar rock. Thomas, can I ask you something? Always. Why did you help me the first night? Really? He set down his knife and carving, turning to face her fully. Because when I looked at you, I saw myself. Someone who had been judged and found wanting by people who didn't understand what they were looking at. And now, when you look at me, now, what do you see? The question was more vulnerable than she'd intended, but she couldn't take it back. Thomas reached out, gently touching her cheek with his weathered fingers. I see the woman I've been waiting for my whole life without knowing. If the confession hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness this time, but of overwhelming gratitude. I was so afraid, she whispered. Afraid that someone like you could never truly care for someone like me. Someone like you? Thomas's voice held gentle. Incredulity. You mean someone kind, intelligent, brave enough to rebuild her entire life from nothing. Someone who was rejected by her own father. Someone who, he silenced her with a kiss so gentle it felt like a blessing. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Your father was a fool who couldn't see the treasure in his own house, Thomas said firmly. But his blindness led you here. To me. To us. I can't find it in my heart to regret that. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening sky, and somewhere in the village, Daniel was probably falling asleep clutching his carved owl, trusting in its power to protect him through the darkness. Eliza thought about protection, about the kind that came from weapons and authority, and the kind that came from being truly seen and valued by another person. She knew which kind felt stronger. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both foreign and completely natural on her tone. "And I love you," Thomas replied, sealing the promise with another kiss under the vast, star-filled sky. 1 year later, Eliza stood at the same spot where she had first set foot in the village, but everything had changed. Where once there had been a weathered, frightened woman stepping down from a wagon, now stood someone completely transformed. Her skin was bronzed by desert sun, her hands sure and capable, her eyes bright with purpose and joy. In her arms, she held her daughter, 3-month-old Abigail, named for the biblical woman who had shown wisdom and courage in the face of adversity. The baby's dark hair caught the morning light as she slept peacefully against her mother's chest. "She's getting heavy," Thomas observed with gentle humor, joining them on the small rise overlooking the village. "She perfect," Eliza corrected, adjusting the soft woven blanket that Maria had made for the baby. "Look how peacefully she sleeps. She knows she's safe." Thomas wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a circle of warmth and protection. Below them, the village was coming to life, children running between the tents, women beginning their daily tasks, men preparing for hunting expeditions. "Do you ever miss it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Your old life?" Eliza considered the question seriously, as she always did his thoughtful inquiries. "I miss the woman I might have been if I had grown up feeling valued. But I don't miss the life I was living." She looked down at Abigail's sleeping face. "This child will never know what it feels like to be unwanted, to be seen as a burden." "No," Thomas agreed. "She'll grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she has purpose, knowing she can choose her own path." A rider appeared on the horizon, causing a stir in the village below. But this time, Eliza felt no fear, no impulse to hide. She was no longer the woman who could be intimidated by her father's power. The rider proved to be young Matthew Yazzie, returning from a trading expedition. He brought news, mail, and stories from the outside world, including word that Governor Montaluna had suffered a stroke and was no longer actively governing. "I should feel something," Eliza told Maria later as they worked together in the healing tent. Abigail sleeping in a cradle board nearby. "Sadness, maybe, or even satisfaction. But I just feel empty about it." "That's healing," Maria replied wisely. "When old wounds stop hurting, it means they've truly closed. The seasons turned." Abigail grew from a sleepy infant into a curious toddler who babbled in both English and Navajo, who learned to walk among the desert flowers and fell asleep to lullabies sung into languages. On Abigail's first birthday, the village held a celebration. The little girl toddled between the gathered adults, fearless and confident, accepting affection from all corners. Watching her daughter move so freely through a world that welcomed her, Eliza felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "She'll never know what we went through to get here," Thomas said, following her gaze. "Good," Eliza replied firmly. "That's exactly as it should be." As evening approached and the celebration wound down, Thomas took Eliza's hand and led her to their favorite spot by the stream. The water still ran clear and cold, still carried the scent of sage and possibilities. "A year ago, did you imagine this?" he asked, gesturing toward the village where their daughter slept safely in their tent. Eliza thought back to that first terrifying night, when she had been nothing but a burden dumped in the desert. Now she was Eliza, walking in beauty, healer and mother, wife to a man who cherished her, daughter to a community that valued her contributions. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine any future at all," she said. "Now I can't imagine any other life." Above them, the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, desert flowers bloomed in the cool night air, their beauty visible only to those who knew how to look for light in unexpected places. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next story.